Sound, music, sustainability. Welcome to Sustain FM. All right, so today on the show, I'm happy to welcome Konstantine Vlasis. Konstantine is an environmental composer, audio researcher, musician, and writer currently based in Iceland, whose work explores how sound, music, and listening mediate experiences of changing landscapes and ecologies. His projects and public talks and performances center on the ways that sound and listening mediate experiences of changing landscapes and how music can be a form of climate communication and environmental storytelling. With collaborations, compositions, and publications with a wide range of people and places around the world, I'm really looking forward to diving into his work and sounds, because as you can already tell from the bio, there's a lot of interesting overlap with some of my work and some of the things that I'm interested in. So welcome to the show, Konstantine.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Happy to be here. So to kick off, one of the things I'm curious about, and I often ask artists on the show that are working with sound and music and tech, is around sort of which came first. And you have some interesting additional layers that, in addition to that, you're also interested in research and you're also interested in the storytelling. So I'm kind of curious how that path started for you. Like, were you interested in music and sound first and then getting into field recording and tech stuff kind of came later? Or was it more starting with an interest in environmental issues and that led to sound? Or did those things kind of co-emerge together? I'm kind of curious what that path looked like, or sounded like, maybe is a better way to talk about it.
Love it. Yeah, well, I guess the kind of long version, or at least I'll keep it short, but I've really been interested in just the act and practice of listening for a long time. Mm-hmm. So when I was a kid, I ended up having 3 different reconstruction surgeries on my right ear.
Oh, really?
So a lot of my kind of childhood memories are just with a bandage around my head and kind of having this plugged feeling in my right ear. And I have some hearing loss in that ear. So I was really just interested from an early age in kind of how we listen and how we experience the sounds of our world. Mm-hmm. And of course, I spent a lot of time outdoors as a kid as well. So just growing up in Southeast Tennessee, the kind of natural sounds of that environment can be can be unique. So like cicadas and the summer evenings, and I also my house was right next to an interstate, so some of that noise pollution was just kind of this omnipresent force. So anyway, so I think I had this early interest in listening, and for me that quickly spilled over into creative practice. So just experimenting with music and learning about music at a fairly early age, and the relationship between how I would listen to sounds as well as music was something that was always fun. So I'd like to think that maybe listening for me is that middle ground between what we might consider sound and what we might define as music. Listening is the shared practice between those two things. So for me, I think that continues on with the work I'm doing today and the things I'm interested in.
Right. Interesting. So, and it's interesting when you talked about sort of that idea of listening from a young age and that hearing loss and those kind of things. I mean, I'm curious, did that affect, because the closest parallel I have, I think, is when I realized I need glasses and I was a kid, and it's like, oh my God, like trees are more than just a green blur at the top and a brown blur at the bottom, and I can actually see what the teacher's writing on the blackboard. And I'm kind of curious, when you're going through those surgeries and sort of obviously paying attention to listening, was the idea or concept that you might be hearing different things than other people or listening in a different way? Was that something that was sort of in your awareness, or just being a kid, did it just kind of feel natural? This is how listening happens.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to give you a kind of profound answer, or kind of a reflexive answer thinking back on it. But honestly, when I was a kid, I think, you just kind of get used to these things. And,
Mhm.
um, it wasn't as if I, um, was experiencing sound and then it kind of became blurry, that kind of visual equivalent or
Mhm.
vice versa. I think it was always just something that I had in my mind that,
Mhm.
or that I was experiencing where, oh, once I get this kind of bandage off, then my ear can finally breathe or
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
like this.
Right, right.
But from a musical background, I think it definitely shaped my trajectory
Mhm.
within the musical arts.
Mhm.
So, I was a band kid and really wanted to play trumpet, wanted that to be my first instrument because
Mhm.
all my friends are playing brass instruments.
Mhm.
But I couldn't kind of blow into the instrument and put pressure on my ear.
Mhm.
So then I started to practice percussion and play drums.
Mhm.
And so this kind of has directed my musical career in a lot of ways. So it's, to kind of trace that history with my own listening and my own ear as kind of dictating uh, my early instrument learning and kind of career path within the percussive arts
Mhm.
is sort of interesting. And maybe also made me have a recognition of protecting one's hearing while
Mhm.
playing percussion instruments throughout
Right,
my life. So,
right. Yeah.
also another important element there.
Hmm. Yeah, I didn't really sort of yeah notice the importance of that. I spent most of the 90s, yeah, at raves, like dancing right in front of speaker stacks with no ear protection whatsoever. And
Wow.
now I'm pretty rigorous about it. But yeah, I find that fascinating, yeah, those different perceptions, because obviously, like even with frequency perception, it's a pretty linear relationship with age where that sort of tails off. But that even affects me when I'm performing, especially a techno set, because I can't really hear anything above, say, 13K hertz anymore. So I always need to make sure I check with the sound tech and say, hey, can you keep an eye on the high end and sort of roll it off? It's too harsh, because otherwise I'm playing, yeah, percussions and hats and snares and stuff from the drum machine that I think sounds amazing. And the 19-year-olds on the dance floor are like, oh my God, that's so harsh. So, because I
Oh
just
no.
can't hear those. I can't hear the sort of 16, 17K that can be like really annoying for people. So it is interesting
Wow.
how the physicality affects our perception, the way we play, sort of, and kind of what listening kind of really means.
Yeah, and it really does, in that kind of description, it really gives you a sense that how listening is an embodied experience and an embodied practice.
Mhm.
And yeah, are you wearing hearing protection now these days, or have
All the
sort of
time, all the
yeah,
time. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, all
good.
the time. And then when I play, I wear in-ear earphones for monitoring, so I can adjust the level of that. So yeah, because especially in a club setting, yeah, it's just yeah like 100 decibels. It's just yeah too loud for that. But I do need to hear kind of what's going on. But yeah, but definitely that embodied fear experience of yeah, feeling the vibrations, which especially for club music is so important. Like you want to hear the thump of the kick drum in your chest, and you want to feel the hairs in your arms stand up from the vibrations and those kind of things, which is almost what I think linking back to one of my earliest memories. Because I grew up, my mom played organ and piano in the church, and she was a choir director. So I would always be at the church when she was rehearsing or doing the choir and that kind of thing. And one of my earliest memories was like lying down on the wooden pew at the front and feeling the whole vibration from the organ bass, because the bass pedals that you're playing there. So I think I can trace a direct line from that to wanting to stand in front of the speaker stacks at raves to get that same like very much embodied feeling of the bass.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
really neat to hear.
No worries. And actually, so that idea of embodiment and practice that you mentioned, maybe that's a segue back into another piece I want to talk about, sort of moving forward a little bit. So you talked about how those kind of different elements kind of emerge. But I'm also very curious about, and we talked about this a bit before the recording started around, and in your bio too. So you do work as a composer, as a researcher, as a musician, as a writer, as a sound designer, and as a performer. And I'm curious, this idea of embodied practice of, do you kind of see those different activities or disciplines or genres, whatever you call them, as sort of separate pieces that kind of intersect in some way? Or is it more that those are like just like different manifestations of a common approach, that it's more like, okay, this is my practice and it just shows up in different ways at different times?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I mean, I certainly want to, uh, yeah, I guess I certainly want to acknowledge how each of those things you mentioned
Mhm.
are their own disciplines and their
Mm,
own practices. And, um, certainly want to take autonomy or the expertise from anyone who
mhm.
specializes in each one of those
Right.
areas of study and areas of practice. I think for me, I like to inhabit all of those spaces, and
Mhm.
so um, I try to use maybe the description of audio researcher or audio storytelling, or trying to find labels that speak to the kind of hybrid space that I've created
Mm,
and for myself and that I inhabit. So I certainly moved through music composition and field recording and sort of audio storytelling, narrative
mhm.
style
Mhm.
podcasts,
Mhm.
sound design, and then the more academic kind of scholarly side of this within sound studies.
Mhm.
My research interest definitely straddle music and sound
Mm,
studies.
mm,
So I've always, or for a long time, I've been interested in that kind of boundary and that division. And so all of those things, of course, influence one another.
mm,
So my background in percussion influences the kinds of things I'm listening for and listening to,
mm,
and my interest in field recording really ends up shaping my approach to music composition and
mm,
the kind of pieces I'll work on and produce. So for me, yeah, I at least want to acknowledge that there each one of those areas is kind of its own interdisciplinary,
mm,
um, or within this interdisciplinary space that I work. Um, each one of those areas is has experts, and I
mm,
feel it's sort of I feel at times that I'm a kind of like I like what I do, but also don't feel like an expert in any one of those areas. So I'm kind of
right.
creating an expertise in this other hybrid area that I'm just
Mhm.
carving out for myself, which is exciting because it means that I also feel like I'm always learning,
Mhm.
and conversations with you and other practitioners just become a really fun moment because
Mm,
it ends up opening up my ears in ways that
mm.
I just didn't anticipate. So yeah, sorry if that's a elongated answer, but
No, no,
I wanted to end it with gratitude. So thanks again for chatting with me.
you're most welcome. And no, I appreciate that, because it's, yeah, I mean, I'm always curious because I think this right now is episode 30 of this podcast. So I've talked to a lot of different artists, and I'm, I think it's one of the common threads that almost all the artists I've talked to, they do sort of straddle these kind of boundaries. And with some of the things that you talked about, sometimes also people are doing dance performance, sometimes people are doing visual art, sometimes people are doing poetry. Um, but I think it's also, yeah, those different sort of forms of expression. But I think for me, it's also some of those different genres, but even the venues allow different sort of forms of expression. So if I'm performing a experimental sound art composition in a gallery with 30 people sitting on cushions on the floor, that's very different than playing a techno set at a club in Amsterdam at 3 in the morning, which is different than doing a performance lecture at a sustainability conference, which is different than releasing a track. So they're not better or worse, but they allow kind of different sort of experiences. And but I definitely get, yeah, the connection of some of the research through, and yeah, I actually want to dive into that a little bit. So So we ended
Well,
up meeting.
is it
Sorry, go
okay if
ahead.
I just
Yeah,
real
please.
quick, like
Yeah.
just hearing you talk about this, maybe it's also, you're talking about 30 something episodes at this point, and this seems like a common thread. Maybe, those of us who work in sound too, or sound and music and these kind of, uh, maybe we're just following the kind of ontology of sound itself. It's this kind of omnidirectional thing that it can be directional, and it can be confined and contained, but, the way that sound functions, it kind of crosses boundaries, and it crosses um, space, and it resonates bodies that we wouldn't otherwise imagine resonate or that have sound. So you're just making me, you said this kind of beautifully, that we are all kind of inhabiting multiple spaces, but I think sound itself functions in this way too. So maybe we're all good listeners, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, that's one of the things that really does fascinate me about sound is I did a workshop a few years ago in Gothenburg, and we were talking about sound in cities. Um, and in one of the discussions, one of the participants, she said, sound peaks around corners, which I just thought was amazing. Is you can't see around the corner of a building, but you can hear around the corner of a building. And to me, that was just a perfect encapsulation of so many different things. Like it's a very practical, like physics of sound. So that's true, but also conceptually, metaphorically, I think that really works as well. That's yeah,
I love
definitely
that
that opening.
peaking.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, so for the research part, so we ended up meeting, well, virtually at least. We haven't actually met physically, but yeah, soon anyway.
Very soon.
Soon, through your work in Iceland, in particular, your work on listening to glaciers, and I know that's actually taken a few different directions and a few different outputs and mediums and so on. But maybe you could start with talking about the research part. And I know you recently defended your PhD dissertation, so congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
And I'm really curious about that. So I'm curious, like what started that work, and kind of what were you hoping to find and hear?
Yeah, thanks for this question, Steve. Um, so I've been interested in Icelandic traditional music for a long time. I've been working with traditional music practitioners here in Iceland since 2015. So this was really mediating my first kind of research trips and field work in Iceland. And over the years, as I was listening to these songs and the poetry, um, in particular, the ways that some of this poetry would describe the Icelandic landscape or nature, some of the metaphors or personification or other poetic devices uh, started to sound different or seemed to feel more literal rather than poetic, or at least in the context of local environmental changes that were happening in Iceland, but also more global climate-related crises. And so this kind of inspired me to start, learning more about these environmental changes at different scales, and turning to these kind of universal, or what has now become universal, or at least global symbols for environmental catastrophe, which are glaciers. That glaciers have become kind of pigeonholed within this single environmental narrative of melt and loss and destruction and degradation. So, I became interested in, well, as someone who's interested in music and sound, or, um, as someone who's interested in music and sound, how might my interest and passions contribute to these conversations? How might I build upon this work that I've been doing in Iceland? And so I started to seek out traditional songs that mention or describe different glaciers.
Okay. Okay.
And so started to look into this, and started to learn more about glacial change specifically in Iceland. And so this led me to the work of Dr. Kieran Baxter and his film After Ice, and which has these amazing crossfade transitions from historical aerial survey photos, and sort of reconstructing those images and juxtaposing them with contemporary drone footage at the same oblique angles. So you really can see, 40, 50, 60 years of change in just a few seconds as they crossfade on screen. And so, um, that film in particular, and the way that glacial change and transformation is often a very viscerally visual experience, or using visuals as that kind of communication tool, had me wondering, well, what's the role of sound? What's the role of listening? Could these interests that I have participate in that conversation, contribute to those conversations? And so this really led me to the work I'm doing now, where, I'm turning to that tripartite balance between sound, music, and listening, and not only trying to understand how these things have mediate our experiences of changing landscapes over time, but how they themselves can be a means for climate communication and environmental storytelling. So, it's kind of a weird path that, music kind of led me to Iceland, and these traditional songs ended up leading me towards Iceland's glaciers, and kind of had, directed my listening to these icy landscapes. And so now I'm kind of at this space where I'm integrating field recording and trying to think about theories of aurality in the context of rapid cryospheric change. So yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, the only problem with that answer is that it makes me want this podcast to be like 4 hours long. So like that's lots more follow-up questions, but I'll try and keep myself focused. When I was reading about some of your works, one of my favorite words that I learned from reading that work was, and if I have the pronunciation right, auscultation, which I find fascinating because even just the sound of that word to me has echoes of occult almost, which means hidden in Latin, also maybe oral from the os part. And I don't know if that's actually what it means, but it sounds like that's what it should mean. But I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about that term and sort of how that shows up in your work?
Sure. Yeah. I'm not quite sure of the etymology of auscultation. I think maybe Latin auscultare, or concerning listening. But this kind of reference to hidden, I think, is a really great way to talk about it, because auscultation is relates to medical science. Okay. So auscultation is the technique of listening to the human body in order to assess or monitor or diagnose health.
Like with a stethoscope as a classic example, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually multiple types of auscultation. So an immediate auscultation has been practiced for a really long time. I think there's even references of from Hippocrates, who's, like pressing his ear against the body of someone and trying to listen to, like, gut sounds and sounds of the intestines and things like this. So that's what you would describe as immediate auscultation, where there's no mediating body. You're just placing your ear directly on the sounding body. By contrast, mediate auscultation, which is what you described, the development of the stethoscope, really, the development of mediate auscultation began in sort of the early and mid 19th century with a French physician. And the early stethoscope was just kind of like a rolled up piece of paper, or this is how the story goes, that kind of rolling up a piece of paper and placing it. So then you have a mediating body that's, almost like a physical conduit for sound to travel from the sounding body through this mediating device so that you can be able to hear it. And I bring up these nuances because I think it's a really great comparison or comparative tool to talk about auscultation in terms of glaciers, or at least like to imagine what a glacial auscultation might be. So for me, for me, there's lots of different techniques of listening that one might practice when listening with glaciers. But in the context of what's happening with glaciers, the fact that glaciers worldwide are falling out of balance makes me think what a healthy glacier might sound like, or a glacier that is in balance, what that might sound like. And so then how might sound help us diagnose glaciers? And this can take many forms. We can talk more about this, but for me, it ultimately becomes a way where, I'm out walking on a glacier, or I'm trying to record sounds, and maybe I'll use a particular microphone. And this is my kind of mediate auscultation. The microphone is my stethoscope that I'm using to record glacier sounds. But I think on another scale, when we're listening back to these sounds, I think glaciers themselves become the mediating body. Glaciers are like the stethoscope that are allowing us to hear or diagnose planetary health. So ultimately, this is kind of what I was thinking about and working towards conceptually and philosophically when I'm writing about and trying to develop this idea of glacial auscultation.
Right. That's fascinating. And I wanted to pick up on one thing you said. I found it quite interesting. When you were talking about that, you said this is sort of what happens when we're listening with glaciers. And I'm really interested to use the phrase listening with glaciers instead of listening to glaciers. I'm curious, what is the idea of listening with glaciers kind of mean to you?
Yeah, I think these small, prepositions matter. These small kind of grammatical choices matter. And for me, I think I mean it in both ways, or multiple. Or let me rephrase this. By choosing listening with rather than listening to or listening for, for me, listening with has multiple connotations. I think, at first, excuse me, burp. So yeah, I think listening with has multiple connotations to me. And, for one, listening with is this kind of idea that we're listening alongside, or that if we're listening to the sounds of the world or a planet of which we are a part, or maybe that's just what I'm trying to communicate, is that listening is an inherently relational experience and relational practice. So I think this idea of listening with glaciers recognizes that relationality. And, on the other hand, thinking about auscultation, that I am listening with glaciers as a conduit itself. The ice is a conduit. It is a mediating body that I am using to listen with a rapidly changing world. Then glaciers become a kind of tool, or they become really important to how sound and listening and music become forms of climate communication, environmental storytelling, that glaciers themselves are part of that process, and that I am listening with them in that way.
Yeah, that's really, that resonates, not to make a pun, but a lot with sort of my work in a couple of different directions. So I've had a project running for a long time called There Is No Separation, sort of talking about the blend between humans and environment that is sort of an artificial separation we've created. But I also do a lot of public workshops at like science festivals, those kind of things, or even performances, giving people a chance to make sound with environment. And I really emphasize the with. So I'll have like a big table with plants and biosensors or light sensors or heartbeat monitors, all those kind of things, or plants that can connect to synthesizers, that kind of stuff. And people really love it and have a lot of fun. But a key piece for me is to really kind of emphasize that, okay, at least with the techniques that I'm and the tech that I'm using, we're not hearing the sound of the plant. What we're actually doing is creating sort of like a hybrid instrument between plant and technology and human, and we're making sounds with the plant. Or the using a light sensor to control the pitch of an oscillator or the cutoff of a filter. We're not hearing the sound of the sun, but we're making sound with the sun. And I love that idea when people, because for me, that's an idea of like a very visceral way of people kind of breaking that down. Or when I have their heartbeat monitor and their heartbeat is triggering like a baseline, it's actually kind of maybe like another level of mediation from the auscultation, because in that sense, we're not actually hearing the sound of the heartbeat. We're detecting the electrical signal of the pulse, which is then triggering a synthesizer to play. So it's the rhythm is generated by the heartbeat. But yeah, it's an interesting way to connect people. And yeah, sometimes when I do workshops or performances, I'll have someone wear the heartbeat monitor and have their heartbeat actually clock the whole system. So if they're nice and calm, the melody will be like bum 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 bum. And if they've had a lot of coffee, it'll be bum 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 bum, and which is a lot of fun as an artist, because I have no idea when I pick a random person in the audience and ask them to stick out their finger. So it's kind of interesting for me as an artist, but also sort of, for me, I think becomes a lot more embodied than just telling people, hey, we're connected to nature. Hey, we actually, our bodies and technology and environment intersect in all these interesting ways. You can do an infographic about that. You can sort of, but it's different when they're actually physically, and especially young kids, they just, with a heartbeat, I'll ask them, okay, now jump up and down, get your heartbeat going faster. And it's okay, now can you be really quiet and close your eyes and just breathe? And you can hear it go bum, 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 bum. And it's just a very, you could do the same thing with a stethoscope, but it's a different thing when the sound is actually coming through the speakers and like a distorted bass line kind of thing.
That's so cool. That is so cool. I would love to come to one of your shows where you're kind of performing this. That would be so neat to take a listen to. And hearing you talk about it, I think it also brings to mind, the important, by listening with, I think it's also acknowledging that, there are two separate entities here, or at least in the examples that you gave. And that, we are kind of forming an assemblage, or we're forming a relationship. But because of that, then our actions and our choices have ramifications. And just hearing you describe how, one series of stimuli impacts another, also means that we have a responsibility toward one another. And so I think that by listening with, I think listening with speaks to all of these things. And you said it really beautifully in your descriptions of how you are listening with in your own performances. So thanks for that.
Cool. You're welcome. So I'm just looking at the okay. So I got a couple of questions that I'd like to get to before we run out of time, because I want to make sure we leave some time for your recordings as well.
Cool.
And I guess this is a bit of a segue, maybe a rough segue from the idea of listening with. So, and also connecting back to some of the different disciplines or genres or formats. So coming up soon, and actually it'll be the day after this interview goes live, in fact, is the premiere of the film Time and Water in Reykjavik, and which is encapsulating a lot of the themes that we've kind of talked about. And so I'm lucky enough that I'll be there to be able to go to actually see it and hear it. Can you tell us a little bit about the film and in particular how you were connected to that production process? Because it's, if I understand it properly, I think it's a kind of an interesting example of what we started off talking about, of sort of the theme and the interests is kind of the same that you've been doing for years, but maybe a slightly different output or format than a composition or a field recording.
Yeah, sure. So the film Time and Water is based off of a book by the environmental writer and artist Andrés Magnusson. And this book shares the same name, or a similar name. I guess the film's called Time and Water, but the book is called On Time and Water.
Okay.
But it's really a kind of reflection on Andrés' family and their connection to early glaciological research in Iceland, and how there's kind of multiple archives that he's navigating, and glaciers are part of that archive. And so Sarah Dosa, who is the director of the film, reached out. I think she had heard about my work through one of the film editors. And, she works a lot with archives and some of her recent work. And so I think maybe the film editor had mentioned, that I'm kind of amassing this archive of glacial sound recordings. And so she wanted to meet and talk through and learn more about what I'm doing. And we had a few conversations. And so then she sort of brought me officially on board as the glacier sound advisor for the film.
That's a cool job title.
Oh yeah, it's really cool. Yeah. I mean, yeah, they were like, is this okay description? I was like, that's a great honor. I'll take it. So yeah, a lot of our conversations just, were focusing on, these philosophical questions about, or conceptual questions of what would it mean for glaciers to have a voice, or, what are the sounds of glaciers? How might sound represent glaciers as sentient or sort of abiotic in the film? How can sound help tell these different types of stories? And of course, within the film, traditional Icelandic songs and kvæðalög and rímnalög play also have a role in the film. So some of our conversations centered on these song traditions as well. And so, yeah, I was just kind of serving as a consultant for the film. And most of a lot of the field recording and sound design is by Björn Viktorsson. So it had some conversations with him as well about different, field recording techniques with glaciers and things like this. And I think they may have used some of my field recordings in the film as well. But yeah, I was just really excited to be a part of the film in that way, and have someone who is really excited and interested about my work and the things I'm interested in. So
yeah, that's super cool. I can't wait to see that and to hear that. And it actually leads into another thread that I wanted to ask about. And this is also a question that I'm yeah, always curious about, and I ask the different artists that are on the show, is kind of this relationship between the artist and artistic intent and the audience, and especially with your interest in the use of music for climate communication, environmental storytelling. And sort of over the years, I've seen sort of a whole spectrum of this, particularly in environmentally related works, where on one end of the spectrum, the message is so obvious and so clear, it kind of feels like a public service announcement, like thou shalt be sustainable, and it just doesn't really feel that artistically interesting. And on the other end of the spectrum, the message or the intent is so abstract and so esoteric, the audience has no idea what's going on. And of course, there's a whole sort of piece in that spectrum. But I'm kind of curious around where you kind of place yourself on that spectrum, in the sense of how important is it that the audience understands your intent or the message or the vision, and I'm kind of guessing or maybe assuming that that actually might be maybe a slightly different answer for a composition versus a documentary versus a thesis or whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a tough question in a lot of ways, but maybe also a simple one too. And for me, it really comes down to asking myself, who is the audience, and what am I hoping to communicate? I think ultimately people will have their own experience with something, and that can be a subjective that is a subjective experience, and I can only direct or mediate listening to a certain extent, and then it's kind of up to them what they get from that interaction or that experience. So I think maybe initially, after those questions, kind of asking myself, who is my audience and what am I trying to communicate? I then very early on just go ahead and forgive myself, of hey, if what you do totally misses the mark, if you miscommunicate something you're hoping to communicate, that's okay. It's a learning experience, and you can always try again.
Right.
But I think that question about who is your audience is really important, because because I'm creating these different types of works. If audiences go and listen to some of my portfolio, that spans kind of contemporary percussion literature, maybe sound art composition, or more kind of avant-garde experimental sound art or installations, and then move into film scoring or voiceover narration and kind of audio stories that are very much just kind of spoken storytelling. And so in all of those contexts, I'm trying to reach different audiences. So something like 2124, which is essentially a data sonification work, I wouldn't say that piece inherently is something that is aesthetically beautiful, perhaps compared to the VR musical score that I wrote, which is more of this kind of like really lush, romantic sounding musical score. So those are for different audiences, and will communicate different things to different audiences as well. So I guess I'm always just trying to ask those initial questions to help guide the creative decisions I make. And really never trying to place myself in a box with any given project.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, yeah, thanks for that. And so you mentioned one of your compositions, and as usual, to close the show, you've been very generous in sharing some recordings to share with our listeners. Can you set this up for us? What are we going to hear?
Yeah, I think I sent maybe 2124 and Ablation, and I guess I'll just give like really quick rundowns of those. So 2124 is a data sonification work for percussion rudiment and ice. So a rudiment is essentially just a kind of rhythmic pattern that allows a drummer to practice hand-to-hand sticking patterns. So when you're listening to the piece, you'll just kind of hear these clicks as the performer is playing this piece of glacial ice with drumsticks. But each iteration of this rhythmic sequence represents 1 year of time. And so he'll play this kind of 9-note sequence 100 times over the course of the piece. And the data that you're hearing is speculative data or projection data that tracks the future recession of the Breiða Merkurjökull glacier in southeast Iceland. So what you're able to hear over the course of the piece is just 100 years of glacial change, the change rate of the glacier over the course of 100 years. And so you'll just end up hearing this kind of continuous and progressive acceleration of the rhythm over the course of the piece. And so then ablation, by comparison, is a percussion quartet for 4 glockenspiels, 4 kick drums, and glacial tape. So all the recordings that you hear are recordings from different outlet glaciers that flow off of the Vatnajökull ice cap in southeast Iceland. And so the musical textures that you hear are really my kind of translations of those recordings. So I'm trying to use written music to highlight some of the musical textures that are present within the glacier sound recordings themselves, or at least what I hear as musical textures. So like the overtone series of the glockenspiel patterns matches the same overtones as the meltwater streams, the kind of 4-note melody and the choral part of the piece. So ba-dee-dum, ba-dee-dum. That melody is based off of acoustic sort of resonant frequencies of the same ice cave over the course of 4 months. So it's just kind of building a melody based on how the acoustics of this space changed. So they're like each musical decision in that piece is focused on, using glacial sounds as the foundational music texture. And then, what else do I want to say about that? Oh, and just that, all of those sounds were recorded within the ablation zone of the glacier. So this is the section of a glacier where a glacier is losing mass. And so it's just really trying to focus on that process and the sounds that are present within that process of ablation.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Okay, can't wait to hear that. And thanks so much for your time. And thank you everyone for listening. And make sure to check out the show notes for more background on Konstantine's sounds. We'll also include links to some of the projects and movies? Can't even speak anymore. Music and movies we talked about today. And also let me know if you have any ideas for other artists we should be highlighting. So thanks again for your time today, Konstantine. I really enjoyed our conversation. And really looking forward to seeing you next week in Iceland.
Sounds great. Thanks, Steve. And thanks for listening, everyone.
Okay, thanks for listening to Sustain. Hope to catch you again next time. Be sure to sign up for our email list on our website, sustain.fm. Follow our Instagram, also sustain.fm, and get more info on the radio show, in-person events in different cities, live streams, and more. All right, until next time, see you on the dance floor.